Taxes. We love to hate them, and we hate to need them. And this Congress, this fall, is going to spend a lot of time debating them. I'm Ron Elving at NPR. Thank you for coming to my office hours. The history of this country can be read as a series of tax revolts, from the Boston Tea Party in 1773 to the latest reincarnation of the Tea Party in 2009. But over all those intervening years, we have also become rather attached to some of the things that taxes pay for. So at this point, it isn't a question of whether or not we have taxes, but how much we tax and who actually winds up paying those taxes. Now, the federal tax burden was originally borne primarily by tariffs and fees on trade. But for the last century or so, the burden has been increasingly shouldered by income and payroll taxes on businesses and on individuals. Congress may raise taxes in time of war or for other causes, or Congress can cut taxes the way they did rather dramatically at the beginning of the presidency of Ronald Reagan. Now, Reagan had been an actor right after World War II in the 1940s. He started making a great deal of money and discovered that the top tax rate in those days was 90% on his last dollar of income. He found that pretty hard to bear. It changed a lot of his view of government and politics. And when he became president in 1981, he introduced a tax cut plan that over 3 years reduced that top rate to about 50%. But he still wasn't satisfied, and in his second term after he was reelected, he put forward a Treasury Department plan that would lower rates still more and pay for that by eliminating a lot of the tax shelters and tax breaks and special treatment that people were able to get to shelter some of their income from those high rates. Now, the Treasury plan ran into some trouble on Capitol Hill, where there were lots of lobbyists for the people who were losing the special treatment they had under the current code. And so, eventually, a group of senators got together and said the way to beat this is to get more radical. Lower the rate all the way from 50% all the way down to 28%, and eliminate even more of the special treatment for certain favored interests in individuals. That turned the trick. They passed it in the Senate. They got it through the House. President Reagan signed it into law. That was the Tax Reform Act of 1986. And that was the most significant change made to our tax system on the federal level since the creation of the income tax itself 100 years ago. Since that time, a Congress and a succession of presidents have been busy tinkering with the tax code some more, putting in special treatment and differential treatment for certain kinds of activity, and that, of course, pushing the top rate back up gradually towards 40%. At this point, the business tax has a top rate of 35%, but actually relatively few businesses pay that full 35% because there are lots of ways for them to legally limit their exposure to the tax and pay less than 35% in effect. So it's time to go back at this entire tax reform business again, as Congress has tended to do roughly once every 30 years. Broadly, Congress has two options. They can enact major surgery on the tax code, as they did in 1986, or they could just pass tax cuts, just lower the rates, particularly for certain income groups. That would be popular. That could get a lot of votes from Republicans who have been talking about tax cuts for years. But many Republicans don't want to do that unless those tax cuts are paid for by spending cuts. Otherwise, it would just add to the annual budget deficit, and that adds to the national debt, which is already at $20 trillion and counting. But there just is not a consensus, even within the Republican Party, as to where to cut spending. Where do you spend less money right now? On the military? On roads and bridges? Social Security? Medicare? Perhaps education? So for months, Congress has been looking forward to finishing with health care and turning to the much more fun prospect of cutting taxes and overhauling the tax code. But right now, it looks as though that might be a case of leaping from the frying pan and into the fire. At NPR, I'm Ron Elving. Thank you for coming to my office hours.